Hello and welcome. I'm doing this episode because I want to give our listeners an insight into how the European West views what's going on regarding jihadism, the Islamization of Europe in the backdrop of the recent shootings in Orlando, and also the recent attack in Paris of a police officer. Well, it was not the attack, the murder of both him and his wife by a ISIS-inspired killing. I'm joined by Ann Sturzinger, a friend of mine who I asked to come on because she is a fluent French speaker who has also visited France several times. She's been to Paris, and she's even been to the quote-unquote no-go zones over there. So she has kind of unique insight, and she has been reading up on this in the French press that doesn't make the Anglosphere. So anyway, Anne, hello, and how are you?
Hello, I'm good, thanks. I didn't get quite as much reading done as I wanted to, partially because I'm actually working on a translation right now of the fictional sequel to Guillaume Fay's Archaeofuturism. Kind of been preoccupied by that this week. It's going to be coming out on Arctos at the end of the year. But also, after the Orlando shooting, the French press barely had time to react to our disaster before they had another one of their own.
Can you I'm going to put a link to the French attack in the description, but could you just give us, the Cliff Note version of what happened in France?
Yeah, it wasn't actually in Paris. It was in the sort of department that the Palace of Versailles is in. So it's kind of like exo-suburban. But basically what happened is this guy had been radicalized. One of his friends, I think, said that he knew that the French government was watching him and he knew that he was under surveillance, but he thought that was hilariously funny. He had a thing against the French police because, unlike American cops, the French police are actually really fucking good at their jobs. Nothing against American cops, but up until about a generation ago, France had mandatory military service for all male citizens, so for at least a couple of years. So logically, if you join the police force, you would have at least some military training going in. And even though they've ended the mandatory military service, the sort of tradition of being a little bit military in the police, I mean, obviously this guy wasn't thinking that deeply about it. He just hated the cops because, maybe they shot one of his fellow terrorists. Anyway.
But no, I think your point is that the French police force is almost like a paramilitary force. In other words, the average French police force would be more like, let's say, our SWAT team or ESU team, like it is in New York. They're trained for dealing with riots and stuff like that. So even the smaller police forces all have this level of professionalism and training.
Right. And they've got their hands full right now. I've been posting on my blog warnings for weeks saying that with the whole Nuit debout, I don't know if your listeners have been caught up on this, but there's a series of sort of escalating, worsening. They started out as youth protests against a labor law that was basically designed to help them get into the workforce by making it easier to fire crappy employees so that employers wouldn't be too scared to hire them to long-term contracts. I don't think I'm going to explain the whole way that the French contract labor system works, but basically, French millennials are protesting the government's attempt to liberalize the market enough to give them jobs. And this is tying up a lot of police resources, which is why I'm really scared that something really frickin' awful is going to happen there again. I mean, not that this incident wasn't awful. 2 people involved in their kid. I mean, what happened was the guy stabbed a police officer who was going home right in front of his house, and then took his wife and child hostage.
So just to get to chronology of the attack, the police officer was he stabbed dead? And then the perpetrator entered the house after he killed the police officer and then killed the wife, or?
He stabbed the guy dead and went into his house, and then he had the wife and child hostage for a while. I'm not sure at what point he killed the wife, but when the standoff was finally over and the cops got in, the wife was dead and the kid was still alive.
Okay, was this guy taken into custody or was he shot?
Oh, I forgot. I do not. I think he was taken into custody, but don't. Let me see if I can look this up quick.
Okay.
Sorry. Let's see. The guy's name was Larosi Abdallah. Oh, and apparently he was already taken into custody in 2013 for something else, but they didn't keep him in there very long.
Okay.
So
this guy was, I think you had mentioned in the pre-interview, this guy was on the police force radar or the intelligence services radar?
Yeah, he was on the intelligence services radar, and one of his friends thought that was really funny.
Now we know that this was ISIS inspired. How? Because he said it, or because did ISIS claim responsibility for this, or how?
Well, ISIS claims responsibility for people tripping over a crack in the sidewalk.
Okay.
But they actually didn't. They didn't. On I think it was Sunday night or Monday, I found out that this story was breaking before I went to bed. And before I went to bed, they weren't saying anything demographic about the guy. It was like they said what the police officer did for a living, but they didn't say anything personal about the guy, except that they knew that he was the police officer's neighbor. So obviously they didn't know who he was. And the fact that they didn't say anything demographic about him made me go, oh, I bet he's a Muslim.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about that, the way that in France, well, probably all of Europe, how they go out of their way not to identify people who are Muslim or Islamists or non-ethnically Europeans?
Well, they're getting better about it just because, the mainstream press has figured out that the internet exists. And, even though they're publishing online, it took them a while to put those two numbers together. But they've figured out that if they too persistently deny the religion or ethnicity of a person in a major case, eventually they're just going to get a lot of flack for it. But I think in this case, they were not mentioning it because they didn't want to jump the gun.
Okay, so this might have just been they honestly hadn't confirmed it yet and didn't want to say it.
Right. I mean, they said it the next day. I think they had to investigate the guy's background first, and they probably knew he was Muslim, but they were thinking, okay, we don't want to jump the gun on this and say anything about him being a Muslim until we're sure that he has history with ISIS. And yes, he did have history with ISIS. And he was already, on a government watch list.
Okay. Now, one of the reasons I wanted to have you on specifically is because you have traveled there and you still have a close friend that still lives on the outskirts of Paris now, correct?
Yeah, he lives in the same suburb that the Stade de France, the stadium that the bomb went off during the Friday the 13th attacks last November. He lives like a mile from that stadium. Okay,
and that was the really devastating attack.
Yeah.
So basically my question is, what is the mindset of the average Frenchman, French woman, or Parisian regarding Islam, this whole jihadist thing? Do they even care about what happened in Florida? Is that on their radar at all? I mean, what's the vibe? I mean, is the consensus is the Overton window shifting, so to speak, in Europe, or what?
I kind of get the feeling that it's about almost kind of where we are. About 50% of the country has its head in the sand and wants to vote for Hillary Clinton, bombing the Middle East some more while keeping our borders open. And about half the country is starting to go, hey, I don't think these people like us.
Okay. That's Anne's Islamic neighbor. So basically, there is still the politically correct still have a stranglehold on political discourse in France.
Yeah, they have a stranglehold on the mainstream media, but like people like my friend who have to work with and live with these people who are not French and who refuse to assimilate and who occasionally kill people. People who are able to keep themselves away from reality are able to, sort of double down on the PC. And people who can't so much are sort of starting to grumble. I mean, the whole Nuit Debout thing is, I haven't been there since the Nuit Debout thing started, but just from the photos you see in the press and a couple of amusing pieces I read on how the Nuit Debout, sort of sheltered college kid types, it really does resemble the Occupy movement in a lot of ways. They're desperate to get all these like edgy young guys from the banlieue to come and protest with them, but those guys don't want to have anything to do with them. They think they're degenerate faggots.
Okay. Well, yeah, because there's not a lot of common ground other than they just want something to bitch about.
Right. Like they both want something to bitch about, and they both, they don't like the government, but for vastly different reasons.
So could you tell us a little bit about what it was like to be in the area that, in the U.S. we call them no-go zones? I understand that that's not really correct. It's not really a no-go zone, but it is kind of like entering a different city when you leave Paris and you go into the Muslim suburbs. Is that correct? Would that be accurate? Could you just maybe talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, I had kind of a unique perspective on sort of the way these suburbs became the way they were. My best friend, she's died now. I'm still in touch with her husband. But she lived in Saint-Denis, that suburb where the stadium is, for I think about 25 years, and I was friends with her for 20 of those years, and she invited me to visit a long time ago. It must have been 20 years ago, the first time that I visited her. And we had a great time, and we really liked each other, and she doesn't like Chicago, so she wouldn't come to visit me here, so every time I wanted to see her, I had to go to Paris, boo-hoo, but, but, I sort of got to see in these little, she was kind of like a frog that's being boiled in water. Things were getting gradually less French and more Middle Eastern, and she didn't notice it as much because she was there day to day, but I would see snapshots, 1 year apart, 2 years apart.
It's kind of like when you go to visit your friend, when you see their kids. And you haven't seen them in a long time, and all of a sudden they've grown. Oh my God! But they don't realize it because they're seeing the kid every day. So unless they look on the wall when they're measuring them or something, they don't notice. Yeah.
Right. Like the number of headscarves is doubled since I was here last. But I mean, there are just these telling little details. Like there was this Johnny Halliday bar that we used to go to years ago. Johnny Halliday is this big cheesy French pop star that old guys like. But, his music is fun. He does a lot of covers of American rock and roll songs. He's fun to listen to. if you have a certain tolerance for cheese. And we'd go to this bar, and there were all these old French guys there who would talk to us for hours, and it was kind of a working class suburb. But a few years ago, this was before Charlie.
No, you lost me. You said it was sort of a working class suburb, and then you kind of cut.
Oh, okay. So that wasn't that long. All right. It was sort of a working class suburb, and there would be all these older working class guys who would drink at the bar with us and tell us, stories for hours. It was so much fun.
And then over time, it got to the point like those kind of places started to close down, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, well, I think the old guy who owned it died, and I found it, and it was hard to find because the beer sign that they had was gone. Like, it was a delirium tremens sign with the pink elephant.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to walk around the block a couple of times before I figured out where it was, because they'd taken down the sign, and they'd also taken down all the Johnny Halliday paraphernalia. So I go in, and the old guy is gone. I don't know if he died of natural causes or not, but his wife is still there, and she's like covered in bruises and looks all fucked up. And she's got this Muslim guy sitting next to her, obviously in a very possessive way. And she's the only woman in the bar. It's like nothing but men. And none of them were, native French. And they looked at me like I was the world's biggest prostitute for walking into their bar.
Wow.
Yeah, it was like night and day. It was a traditional French bar, and all of a sudden, a couple of years later, it's like women aren't allowed. I mean, I don't know how the guy at the bar acquired this wife and bar. I don't know what happened there, but it was really creepy, and I just kind of like slammed my drink and walked out.
Okay. And you could probably tell this is not a safe environment to be in.
Oh no! I mean, it was very menacing, and another less sinister detail was there was a little bookstore right by the metro. When I first started coming there, it was kind of an alternative bookstore. They'd sell like labor publications and goofy comic books and all kinds of books. And a couple of years ago, it became a store that only sold study guides to the Quran.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, those were the only books that were in there.
So basically, you're saying that over time, you would visit every year or two, a couple of years. You would see more and more changes. You're just highlighting some of the more dramatic ones, where even parts of the neighborhood that were kind of iconic to that neighborhood were gone.
Yeah.
And what about would you say, I think you had mentioned in the pre-interview that it was white flight basically that was going on, or?
Yeah, I mean, my friend died last year, actually the day either before or after the Charlie Hebdo massacre. And her husband is moving into downtown Paris because he just can't take it anymore. I mean, I went to visit him after she died to make sure that he was okay, and I've never felt like this in France before, but I stopped going out at night by myself because I was terrified to walk from the metro back to his house.
And this was a justifiable fear, a woman being alone, or walking in that part of France.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a very scared to walk alone at night person. I live in Chicago.
Right. Yeah. It would be kind of tough, wouldn't it? Yeah, especially in the winter with the short days.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be able to get home from work. And I've just never felt anything like that in France. I mean, I was the only woman on the street. It's like 9 or 10 at night, and there's no women around, and everyone's staring at me. I was just like, well, I guess I'm just gonna either have to wait till my friend gets off work or just sit in his house alone at night, because I can't do this.
And is there like a huge just lack of police presence? Like, it seems to me, I've got to understand, I've never been there, but just from, anecdotal stories I've heard and from what little I've read or seen on television, it seems that the police just seem to don't bother with these areas, just not so much out of fear, but just because they don't want to. The police just don't want the hassle.
Well, actually, it's more and more becoming out of fear. You know, I forget what town it was, but a few months ago I was reading, what was it? I think it was a fireman. Like there was a fire call and a fireman went into one of these neighborhoods and the fireman was attacked. So they sent in police after him and the police got attacked.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, why do you think it is that the French people seem to be immune to having their political views altered by such obvious evidence that these people don't want to assimilate and don't like them?
Catholic guilt.
Well, all due respect, the French are not very Catholic anymore.
Well, they're secular, as far as their belief in God goes, but Catholicism is the sort of poisonous emotional guilt that will probably stick with them at least 3 or 4 more generations after they stop believing in God entirely.
So you would blame it more on a Catholic guilt than a fear of being called xenophobic or...
Well, it's the Catholic guilt that keeps them so paralyzed by accusations like xenophobia. I mean, I think it makes them particularly vulnerable to that kind of political correctness. You know, they're told that, your grandfathers exploited Senegal and then these Senegalese workers came here and then they exploited them and so they deserve to be blown up. And they go, oh yeah, I'm guilty, I'm guilty. It's kind of sad and disgusting.
Well, there's a similar thing going on in Germany where I could kind of understand it because the legacy of Nazism. So they're terrified about being associated with that in any way, shape, or form. And also they have very strict rules regarding free speech. Could you talk for a second, if you know anything about the free speech restrictions they have in France regarding discussing these types of issues, if any of them even exist?
Well, I'm not saying that I'm disgusted by these. First of all, I'm not saying I'm disgusted by these individuals for feeling this fear. I'm disgusted by the people who are manipulating it. Second, I think, let's see, both Michel and Ulbeck and what's her name, Le Pen Jr. God, I'm going senile. The politician.
Yeah, was it the president or the prime minister or whatever it is over there?
Oh, no. She's running. I think she's running for something right now. She's Le Pen's daughter.
Oh, she's a nationalist.
Yeah, she's a nationalist. It's driving me nuts because I can't remember her name. Marine Le Pen.
Okay.
She was fined for hate speech. Michel Houellebecq, the novelist, was fined for saying that Islam is the stupidest of religions. I don't think the French are as draconian as the Germans, but they have a much broader conception of hate speech than we do, and they don't just cry you down in the media about it. They will, take legal action against you, and they can.
Right, they will fine you or even possibly imprison you.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, I know in Germany they actually imprison people, and as well as Austria. In France, I think it's more they just go after your checkbook and maybe you could lose your job, things like that. I also know it's bad in Sweden, but I don't know the exact laws. I think a lot of it is just public shaming.
Yeah.
That's what they try to do in this country, as we all know. But of course, it doesn't seem to be working anymore because it seems to be being called an Islamophobe is almost like a badge of honor now.
Yeah. Here, I found it. The penalty for inciting racial hatred in France is up to a year in prison. So they can throw you in prison. It's just Marine Le Pen beat the charges.
Okay.
After she was charged for hate speech after she compared Muslims praying in the streets to the Nazi occupation.
Ah. Actually, I think the Nazis treated the French better.
Yeah.
Once they conquer them.
Yeah, once they gave in, not quite so many coordinated attacks. But so yeah, you can go to prison in France for hate speech, and hate speech can be as vague as comparing Muslims praying in the streets to another kind of occupation.
Yeah, it's extremely subjective, these laws they have. But what, quote unquote, what the hell is hate speech?
Right.
So basically, if it hurts anybody's feels, well, they can report you to the police.
Yeah, like, I hate popcorn. Oh, you're going to go to jail.
Yeah, if popcorn. Well, if you said the croissant, you'd probably get 3 years for that.
Yeah.
So, but was there any talk in France regarding the shooting in Orlando?
Yeah. Like I said, they only had about 24 hours to respond to it, or less, before they had their own disaster. But yeah, I read a couple of interesting articles that I think the main takeaways in the press so far are, and this is funny. This was mentioned in several articles. First of all, France seems to get French journalists seem to have the impression that we thought that having an ocean between us and the Middle East was going to protect us from, the kinds of things that have been happening to them. And that sort of led to a discussion of how the internet has made ISIS sort of an organization that can attack through. They're not even sleeper cells. They're just individual people who find ISIS propaganda on the internet and decide that they're going to get some points with Allah by shooting up a nightclub or what have you.
Well, yeah, they're self-radicalizing.
Yeah.
Like it appears that this individual was born in the United States and went to school here and all that, and then somewhere along the line he I mean, there's some issues with his dad. I think you know more about than I do. His dad is some kind of nutcase who wants to become president of Afghanistan, and I believe he had said things in a video supporting ISIS or something like that, or at least jihadism.
Right. Well, he's an interesting case because he seems to have been a little bit gay himself. I mean, it came out that people who survived the attack said they'd seen him hanging out at the bar before. He hung out there a lot, and he would basically just watch what was going on and get drunk and angry. One person said that he was kind of sad because he always obviously wanted to fit in, but nobody liked him because he was a little bit crazy. And I think the reason he was crazy came out pretty clearly in the interview that his dad did after he shot everybody up, which basically boiled down to, I can't believe my degenerate faggot son did something crazy like that. I've always told him it's God's job to punish gays.
Okay, so he was like a self-hating, repressed homosexual.
Yeah, because, I mean, his father bought lock, stock, and barrel the whole, Muslim line on homosexuals being evil and they're going to get it from God. And then he was socially awkward and he didn't fit in. I mean, he was even on some gay dating apps.
Yeah, I heard he was on Grindr or Grindr. I'm not sure what I believe it's the homosexual equivalent of Tinder.
Yeah, I forget what it's called myself, but I mean, it's really kind of a sad story. Not that I feel any more for him than I feel for the people who weren't closet cases that he shot up.
Well, there's a lot of people that have issues with their sexuality. Don't go around murdering innocent people en masse in a club. I mean, this guy was an evil person to do something so, heinous, to destroy so many lives, and then how many more, the family members and the loved ones. I mean, this is truly horrific event.
Yeah, I mean, it's awful, but I don't think he would have done that if he hadn't been sort of caught between wanting to be loyal to his ethnicity and his religion, and the fact that he's in a society that's open where he's getting gayness shoved in his face all the time.
But he was married twice, I believe.
Yeah, and his first wife had to flee from him because he kept beating her.
Yeah, there's, I haven't got the whole, it's kind of hard to keep up with you don't know what's true or what's not in the media anymore because you're kind of bombarded with all these little tidbits of information as they kind of trickle out. And you don't know
Yeah.
what's true and what's a rumor and things of that nature. Um,
Yeah.
but I think it can be confirmed that he had been to this gay club on several occasions prior to the shooting, and I'm fairly certain he did have a homosexual dating app on his phone or whatever.
Yeah.
So there was something going on there as well. But it also is true that he did dial 911 and claim he was doing this in the name of whoever the current ISIS leader is, whose name I
Right.
don't remember, and I do believe he said Allah Akbar as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking before you called about if I was reading the French writers musing about how this sort of self radicalization makes it possible for Muslims all over the world to form their own tiny terror cells. Um, and it's a great tactic if you just want to hurt people and sow fear and get some sort of feeling of revenge. But as an overall tactic, if this is indeed a war that they want to win in some way, their MO seems if they have any seems to be that they think that if they terrify average U.S. citizens enough, that somehow we can get our government to stop bombing in the Middle East. But they also seem to think that we can't get our government to close our borders.
So in other words, their viewpoints seem to be conflicted, or their
Yeah,
strategies seem to be in conflict with each other.
right. Like,
My view of it is that they don't have any way of really directly fighting the United States in a conventional military sense.
mhm,
So this is basically what they're reduced to. I mean, they can't fight the United States on a battlefield
right.
with any success. So they try to do it this way because it's all they have.
Yeah, and it feels good.
Yeah, so there's a short-term satisfaction to it. And also the casualties on their side are extremely minimal, right? They lose one guy to this guy killed 49 and wounded 53. And
Yeah,
I believe four of the people are in critical and I don't even know if they've been stabilized yet. They're still touch and go on them. So it's possible that that death count could rise.
yeah,
I mean, that's my theory on it. Who knows what's really going on inside their minds, or even if they're thinking it out that far. Certainly, I don't think this guy really did. He just went on this, killing spree that was as much inspired by religion as it was his own internal psychological conflicts trying to resolve his sexual orientation with his religion.
right.
But if we just go back to France and Europe for a second, how do you see them responding, let's say, a year from now, if the current demographic and cultural influences remain constant or increase?
Well, I don't know. I'd like to say I hope the EU will fall apart and each country will be able to take back control of its own borders. That would be a start. Worst case scenario is just total civil war. Like I said, I'm very disquieted by the whole Nuit debout thing because, once again, most of Nuit debout is peaceful protests, but there are what they call casseurs, which just basically means vandals, who yesterday, I think they're sort of on the fringes of the Nuit debout protests, and they're doing really violent things, like cars on fire, police cars on fire. Last night, they attacked a children's hospital. They broke a bunch of windows in this children's hospital and spray painted "Don't work at all ever" on it.
So is this basically some sort of, excuse me, is this some sort of like basically leftist ideology?
I mean, Nuit Debout is pretty much a reaction to what they call liberalism, which we would kind of call almost libertarianism, but not hardcore libertarianism. Just making their economic system slightly less socialist so that it functions a little better.
So it's a violent reaction to economic reforms that are currently going on in France.
Right, or that they're trying to put in place. The government is trying to put these reforms in place, and they're rioting to try and get rid of them. But like I said, most of them are relatively peaceful. They're just blocking things off physically. But the casseurs that are being blamed for all the, all the fires and cops being attacked and rocks and bottles being thrown and things being set on fire and children's hospitals being vandalized. They don't say anything about the demographics of the casseurs. So I suspect that that's the one part of Nuit Debout that isn't just spoiled college kids.
Okay, so you suspect that there's Muslims who are have married themselves to this organization just because it's violent and against the government.
Yeah, and then they get to blend in with the crowd and then, cause all this mayhem and then blend back into the crowd, and everyone just blames it on these sort of amorphous casseurs.
Okay, interesting. All right, so yeah, it's a perfect cover.
Yeah.
And probably this youth group, or I don't even know if it's mostly youth, I'm assuming it is probably, some of them are probably very sympathetic to them because they're like, well, let them do the dirty work, kind of.
Could be, or just I feel too guilty to say anything bad about them. I mean, the Nuit Debout have sort of emboldened some grown-ups to go on strike too.
Okay, so France is in a lot of trouble right now.
Oh yeah, I mean I'm loath to make any predictions because it's a really volatile shit show right now.
Okay, so all right, so fair enough. Then I won't ask you to try to war game that out anymore because you said it's just too fluid a situation right now for you to even know what's going to happen over there.
Yeah, and like I said, I haven't been there in a year, so I don't know what it's like on the ground. I'm just reading the press, and like every day, it's just, before the Orlando thing even happened, I think last week there was an incident in nowhere near Paris, in a small town in the south where I'm sure you've heard about the Sharia patrols in England, in London.
Yes.
This was kind of a similar thing. And it's happened before, but I think this is one of the first serious arrests. Some guys were going around, and they've actually demanded protection money from some bars. They don't want alcohol served during Ramadan.
Oh yes, actually, before we change topics, you said there was something about that you wanted to mention about that. There was an attack regarding that serving of alcohol during Ramadan, I believe.
Right. This is that.
All right, go ahead.
There was a waitress who they had warned not to serve alcohol during Ramadan, and she was actually practicing Ramadan. She was of their faith, but she was just doing her job. And one of them physically attacked her and beat the shit out of her. And he's gonna do 2 years in prison, which isn't enough, because like one of the commentators I was reading today said, if someone is sort of married to this jihad ideology and they do 2 years in prison, they're going to do the same exact thing when they get out again.
Right. And when you said beat the shit out of her, it wasn't like she was just smacked. She literally had the shit beat out of her.
Yeah.
Okay. So it was a real violent assault.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't like a slap across the face. It was a genuine assault. And like I said, she was practicing Ramadan. She wasn't even drinking alcohol. She was serving it. But, it's kind of a territorial pissing. They want to have Muslim zones where they don't have to even look at anyone drinking alcohol during Ramadan.
Yeah, well, there's similar things going on in parts of London where the entire neighborhoods have been completely taken over, where they completely intolerant of Western clothing or anything like that. They just don't allow it. And
right.
It's tolerated by they just recently elected a Muslim mayor in London.
Right.
So, I mean, that city is lost. I mean, I believe Muslims are now the majority of the city's populace. And interestingly enough, he's the guy. Well, you know about just briefly. Can we just touch on the Brexit? I was curious
Yeah.
if the French people have any opinion about the British leaving the EU.
I haven't seen anything about it in the past couple of days. I haven't really seen much about it at all.
Well, I just know in the most recent polls, it's actually tipped in favor of the Brexit, which is good
Yeah.
news.
Yeah, I was actually I was actually listening to a Sargon of Akkad podcast today, and he was saying that it's tipped in favor of the Brexit, and his conjecture is that the reason it's tipped is because the pro Brexit, I mean the pro staying in the EU camp just keeps lying, and it's pushing people into the leave camp. Which, I think that these Muslim scare tactics in the United States are having kind of a similar effect. The mainstream media and Clinton and Obama keep trying to say that this has nothing to do with religion. And, it's pushing people into the Trump camp.
Yeah, well, Obama won't even mention Islam. He'll just call it. He'll just call them radicals, or what word does he use, or something like that. He won't say radical Islam or anything like that. He'll leave the word Islam out. As if these people are Buddhists or something. But on a personal note, what is your feelings about? And I know this is kind of a tough question. I'm going to put you on the spot, but what are your feelings about the whole incident that happened in Orlando, the shooting, and not so much the shooting, but how the press and how the country has reacted about it?
Well, I mean, I think everyone's trying to make so much hay out of political hay out of crises that I almost don't feel guilty about hoping that this has some positive effect. So I'm just not even going to self-censor about that. It's fucking horrible that all those people died. But, maybe the upshot will be the gay community, which is typically liberal, will wake up and go, fuck. I mean, as Milo put it, the left has to choose between Muslims and gays because one of them keeps killing the other.
Yeah, and that always seems to me so shocking how these homosexuals who are out are able to maintain this cognitive dissonance where they don't, they refuse to believe that Islam literally wants to throw these people off of buildings.
Right. Well, I think a lot of the ones who publicly, loudly maintain the cognitive dissonance are doing so because they're professional leftists.
Yeah, and when the leader of these organizations, that's what they tend to be. And those are the ones that we hear about the most. And
Right.
that is possibly the silver lining, is that maybe the rank and file that are loosely affiliated with these organizations, maybe they are starting to question it.
Right. Exactly. I mean, maybe they won't even admit it, but when they go to the voting booth, they're gonna say, do I want to vote for the guy who wants to get rid of the people who want to kill me, or do I want to vote for the lady who not only has a really bad track record of bombing the Middle East and making them angry, but thinks it's racist to close the borders?
Right. And I don't know if these people would go so far as to vote for Trump. I think it's more likely that they'll feel so, what's the word, when you don't feel you have any choice.
Apathetic?
Yeah, exactly. They'll feel so apathetic about both candidates. There's so much that they don't like about both candidates. I think a lot of them will just stay home.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
So I think a lot of that voting bloc just won't bother to vote on that Tuesday. They'll just say, you know what, I can't pull the handle for either one of these two people. And that ultimately will play into Trump's favor. Like I was, half joking when I heard about when I first heard about the attack, I said, well, that means Trump just won Florida.
Yeah, I mean, Trump was a little more excited about it than was seemly for a public figure. But I mean, if I were him, I'd be clicking my heels a little bit in secret.
Well, he might be, but I mean, then again, this was a terrorist thing. I don't believe Trump is the evil, evil guy that they make him out to be. And basically,
Oh, no, I'm just saying, like, no matter how bad you feel about those 50 people losing their lives in this horrible, gory, bloody situation, and all the people who are going to be crippled or paralyzed because, they were one of the 50 people who got otherwise wounded, it can't not cross his mind that the Islamists just handed him however many million votes.
Right, that's correct. And, and the same thing has been happening, I believe, every time he's had a rally. When people watch the news coverage of the protesters, it terrifies them, and fear is a great motivator. And I think a lot of these people will come out and vote for Trump out of fear. They're like, look, this is the only guy that's, willing to guard the gate against the barbarians who are, banging on the other side of it.
Yeah.
So,
and I mean, all the people who are carrying Mexican flags at his rallies, and the left has tried to explain it away as like, oh, it's a symbol of their cultural pride. Like, no, that is a political symbol. That is, you don't see them marching around with Mexican flags by the opera.
Right. Yeah.
They're saying that they want to interrupt our political process and interject their polity into it.
Yes, that's exactly what they want to do. I mean, well, some of them have said, they had signs even like "Make California Mexico Again" and things of that nature. I believe that was at the San Jose demonstration, possibly as well. I believe there was one in San Diego too. There's been so many, I don't. It's hard to even keep up anymore. They kind of all look the same, the people. The demonstrators. Because they all have the same kind of slogans. They're all doing the same kind of thing. But one of the images that really stuck in my mind, where I said, "Well, that's a million votes for Trump," was when they had that blonde girl that was trapped. She was cornered, and they all egged her and threw everything at her. And I don't know if you saw that.
Yeah, I saw that. I also saw the one of that kid that they were just chasing around, like just this mob was chasing this white kid around.
Oh yeah, and he was tackled by some black guy, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was pretty scary, and people literally were running for their lives.
I mean, that's absolutely terrifying, and it's barbaric. I mean, this isn't the way American elections normally are. This is the way elections are in the third world. This is the way elections were in Nazi Germany. If it's ironic that they're calling Trump supporters Nazis because they're the ones who are acting like brown shirts, and they're the ones who are justifying violence being an acceptable part of the political process.
Well, an interesting little aside that I can leapfrog off what you just mentioned was, a lot of people don't know this, but in the late 20s and early 30s, the communists used to beat the crap out of National Socialists. Yeah, and that's where that's why the brown shirts were created. Was to turn it around. The communists were terribly violent.
Huh.
And that's where the brown shirts came about. They were basically the enforcers. I mean, up to the point of the Reichstag fire, there really were only two real parties in Germany anymore. I mean, there were other parties, but they didn't count. It was kind of like, like we have a Green Party here or something, but they don't really count. That kind of a thing. And it basically had just come down to where you had like 49% were National Socialists, 49% were communists. And then you had the Reichstag fire, and then, of course, that was blamed on the communists, and then everyone voted National Socialist after that. So anyway, just a little bit of history in there. A lot of people think that it was the brown shirts that was beating everybody up. No, it was the commies. And a lot of people don't know that. Well, because it's not PC to say that.
Right. You can't even say Hitler was vegetarian without all the vegetarians in the room fainting.
Yeah, that's right. He was vegetarian, and he was also against drinking and smoking.
Actually, I heard that he thought Islam was pretty awesome.
Well, he didn't have an affinity for any religion. He was he believed in natural law. He didn't believe in he didn't believe in a deity that interfered in day-to-day life.
Okay.
But he believed that Islam was a religion that was perfect for war. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. I mean, it kind of is.
That's how he viewed it. And I don't know if Hitler so much spoke on that so much as it was Himmler.
Okay.
But yeah, Hitler didn't give a lot of, Hitler had huge disdain for Christianity because of Germany's past, 30 years war when you had the Protestants and the Catholics killing themselves, yet they both claimed to be Christian.
Right.
That was one of the reasons he had such disgust for Christianity. But I don't think he was necessarily a fan of Islam. He just said, well, yeah, I guess as far as religions go, this would be okay in time of war. But that's a complete aside. But I just want to ask you if you have any ending thoughts, or if you want to tell us about any projects you're currently working on, or anything you want to plug.
Yeah, I've been working on, like I said, a translation of Guillaume Fay's Archaeofuturism 2.0. It's going to be out on Arctos by the end of the year. Archaeofuturism is his sort of book of theory about how everything's going to come together in the next few decades to cause the world to just fucking collapse into a sort of pre-feudal society that will cause us to go back to our old values and start over again. The thing I'm working on now is a bunch of short stories that are sort of a little bit Lovecraftian, a little bit fantastic, that he wrote sort of springboarding off of that theory.
So you said you're working on them. What do you mean? You're translating them, or?
Yeah, I'm translating.
Okay. All right. Well, these if people want to find out more, can they just go to your blog or somewhere else, or what?
Well, that actually hasn't been published yet. It's coming out at the end of the year, but I still have my second edition of Nusquam is already out. My publisher never really announced it, but it's out. You can just go on Amazon, and I'm also working on a new Kindle edition because the current Kindle edition is crap. That should be out in a few days. But the paperback edition is available at Amazon.com. Just Google me at Amazon.com and find the book that says Nusquam.
I'll also put a link in the description for anyone that's interested in that. Anyway, Anne, thank you so much for doing this on such short notice.
Oh, sure. I had one last thing that I forgot to mention.
Sure.
About the French press. It's kind of a funny thing to put at the end. And this was mentioned a couple of times in different articles. The French are still salty, and I didn't even hear about this at the time, but they're still a little angry that after the Charlie Hebdo shootings, Obama gave them shit. And get this is after Ferguson, okay? Obama gave them shit about not being welcoming enough and not doing a good enough job of integrating their minorities.
Oh, I didn't even know that he did that.
Yeah, I didn't know it either, but apparently the French, all know that and remember it and are pissed.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
Well, it seems like Obama's going to have no friends left at all by the time he leaves office.
Yeah, I mean, he wanted to be president of the world, and now he's not even going to be president of his own family.
Yeah. But I could go a couple of directions with that last statement. I think he might have some issues with his own homosexuality, or his sexual identity.
Oh my!
I'm just kind of speculating there. So if the Secret Service is listening, I didn't really mean that.
And I don't know this man.
Yeah. Anyway, but thanks again, Anne. And like I said, everybody, if you want to learn more about Anne's upcoming work, I'm going to put the links to her blog as well as the link to her book, the Amazon link, so you can buy it there. And like she said, the Kindle edition is coming out, but you can already the new paperback version is already out, so you can purchase that from Amazon directly. All right, Anne. Well, thank you very much.
Always a pleasure.
Welcome.